Come on up. He's the guy who put the team together.
Bob, it's not easy. It's not easy to repeat success, to keep everyone happy, to keep the gang together. Just how have you been able to do that with this team?
It's the players. It's Steve, it's the players, it's Joe for supporting us. I'm thankful, Lisa, to just have been with these three guys basically my whole career. So it's a blessing every day.
4 championships, 5 finals appearances, the greatest regular season record in NBA history, and ushering in a new era for which the game of basketball is played, all in the span of 8 years. The Golden State Warriors will go down as a dynasty to be remembered, not just for the winning itself, but the manner in which they played the game, executing offense to perfection that teams around the league desired to emulate. And the mastermind behind it all, the Warriors GM Bob Myers, the architect who put it all together. Or was he? You see, as good of a job as Bob Myers did, and no one is doubting that he's a high-quality GM that deserves a lot of credit for the Warriors' success, over the years, Bob Myers has slowly become one of the more overrated executives in the NBA, and rather than being the architect of a dynasty, was more so a man who inherited a ready-made system that he happened to execute upon. And when it came time to building the post-dynasty era, things started to become a little more clear that Bob Myers maybe wasn't the genius basketball mastermind that so many people claim that he was. And it's likely what led to him stepping down as the Warriors general manager. Call it a hot take, call it ridiculous and unfounded, but let me explain why Bob Myers isn't the basketball guru and genius we thought that he was. If you're new to the channel and you'd like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, I want to be very clear because I already made a statement on Twitter when it was announced that Myers wouldn't be returning to the Warriors as their next GM for next season that I personally consider Myers to be an overrated executive. That by no means though does that mean I think he's a lousy GM or incompetent or doesn't deserve any of the credit for the Warriors' success. No, thinking someone or something is overrated doesn't mean that it inherently is bad. There were a lot of people who think Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant were overrated or LeBron James is overrated. Does that make them bad players? No. Just that some people don't agree with all the hype surrounding their careers or that they were propped up higher than they should have been. So I want to make that clear from the start, but hear me out on why Bob Myers as an executive is overrated. Now, a lot of people forget that Bob Myers didn't join the Warriors front office as an assistant GM until April 2011. Then he became the GM at the end of the 2012 season after the current one stepped down and has held that position up until a few days ago. People forget Bob Myers did not draft Steph Curry or Klay Thompson when he joined the team in the front office. They already had those guys. He did draft Draymond Green, which was a major get considering Green has been one of the greatest steals of this generation going in the second round. And while yes, it was impressive, drafting in the second round, you get to that point where you're kind of just splitting hairs depending on your draft positioning and hoping you hit on a gem. And the Warriors did. So Myers only drafted one of the big three, and while hiring Steve Kerr, yes, was one of the best moves as a GM that he made, especially in firing Mark Jackson, which you could argue hiring Kerr alone is what made him such a great GM and snagging one of the better basketball minds in the league and a coach that has been great in maximizing his players' strengths and developing them and buying into his offensive system. At the same time though, hiring Steve Kerr, who was a first-time head coach at that time of his hiring, was a bit of a gamble. They didn't know how he was going to turn out or whether he was going to be able to take this group to the next level that Jackson couldn't do. But it paid off, because without Steve Kerr, it's unlikely this team goes on to win all of the championships that they did. Now, moving along further down the timeline, the Warriors get Kevin Durant. Getting KD really is not that impressive of a free agent acquisition under Bob Myers' tenure. KD wanted to win a ring. He was fed up in OKC, bounced to go play for a team that he couldn't beat himself, and went the easy route in ring chasing by joining a 73-win team that was already a well-oiled machine. It's not like this was some masterful plan and negotiating they had to orchestrate to get Kevin Durant. He was coming. And I know some will say, well, give him credit for making the moves necessary to be able to bring in Kevin Durant by trading away players and shedding salary to make the money work. If KD says he wants to join your team, you do whatever you can in shedding that salary, even if it means trading players for pennies on the dollar to get it done. And that's what Myers did, just like any GM would do. There's nothing groundbreaking about that or some miraculous feat that he was able to pull off. The Warriors go on to win 2 more titles with Kevin Durant, which I mean, I hate to say it, but those 2 titles were a walk in the park for both of those seasons when you have the Splash Brothers in their primes and now adding Kevin Durant also in his prime. But after KD left, or after KD wanted out, I should say. He wanted to go to his own team, make it himself, and show the world he could win on his own, even though that plan has crashed and burned. One thing I will give credit to Bob Myers for was being able to execute a signing trade, which netted them D'Angelo Russell, which he then flipped for Andrew Wiggins, who ended up becoming a great fit for them, and was arguably the team's second best player in their fourth title run. Now, you could argue the Nets needed to execute a sign and trade in order to be able to acquire Kevin Durant, since they couldn't do it in signing him as an outright free agent, but the return they got, and then flipping that into Wiggins when they could have lost Kevin Durant for potentially nothing, that's impressive. But here's the biggest piece for me for why Bob Myers isn't this next level executive that is light years ahead of the competition. When it came time to start building the Warriors' future beyond the team that he inherited, when it came time to putting together that second timeline, Myers was dropping the ball. I mean, really, when you look at the Warriors' future as it stands right now, once the big three ride off into the sunset into retirement, which is possible, one of them might already be on their way out this summer in Draymond Green, what is there that makes you say this is a contending team in the making? What's funny is that the Warriors actually were given an opportunity to make real headwinds in their future post-Steph Curry by being afforded 3 lottery picks in the span of just 2 years after injuries, and losing KD made them one of the worst teams in the league, which netted them the number 2 pick in the 2020 draft, and missing the playoffs in 2021 without Klay, which got them the 14th pick, as well as the 7th pick via a trade. But so far, those picks haven't materialized. And when you look at players that were selected after them, it makes it look even worse. Drafting Wiseman second overall, who was either injured or so bad that even when he was available to play, they had to send him down to the G League, and even at the G League, he wasn't doing that well. They ended up trading him for parts to the Pistons when they could have drafted players like LaMelo Ball or Tyrese Halliburton. In 2021, they drafted Kuminga 7th overall, which I do still like Kuminga. I think he has a lot of potential, but drafting him over Franz Wagner, yeah, that was a mistake. And then Moses Moody, who hasn't really given us any indication that he's going to be something special. But the biggest mistake of them all, the mistake that would ultimately lead to Myers stepping down, and it's really two-pronged, is handing out a fat contract to Jordan Poole to the tune of 4 years, $140 million with incentives, and also not doing anything about the punch which Draymond tried to knock out his own teammate in Jordan Poole. Look, I get that Poole had an incredible season in 2022, which was a big piece for their title run. I get that he exceeded expectations relative to where he was drafted, and drafting Poole in and of itself was actually a big win for the Warriors, getting him 28th overall. But because the Warriors felt they finally hit on a draft pick since Draymond Green, how the kid was young, how his style of play sort of resembled Steph Curry's, they felt the need to pay him now, and pay him big. And that wasn't necessary. They didn't need to extend him early. Yes, Poole could have balled out the next season, would have required more money, and he would become a restricted free agent, but that's the risk you take when you see a young player having a good season. You take a step back and say, is this kind of play sustainable? Is he going to continue to grow and get better, or was this an isolated incident? Do we wait and see how he does this upcoming season as a prove-it year, and then we pay him? And keep in mind, he would have been a restricted free agent had they not reached an agreement on a contract extension. They would have had the control in retaining him by matching any offer sheet he received. And instead of the Warriors setting the market for Poole or creating their own market for him by offering him $140 million, they could have let the market dictate his value to see what other teams would have offered him and match the highest bidder, which now, based on the season Poole just had, especially with what we saw from him in the playoffs, would be a lot lower than the contract the Warriors ultimately gave him. They jumped the gun, paid the man too quickly because they needed to start focusing on their future. And now it's going to cost them because it limits their ability to be flexible on the cap sheet going forward. And it's going to be hard to trade his contract when he's making that much money for the value and production that he provides. And then, as I mentioned, the Warriors, really, meaning Bob Myers, screwing up in not disciplining Draymond Green properly for that punch in training camp. The fact that they didn't even suspend him one game or handed out a fine of any kind essentially told Jordan Poole, we don't care. We side with the veterans, and him playing and keeping the team together is more important than him putting his hands on you. Obviously, I'm not saying the Warriors condone violence because Draymond was asked to leave the practice and be away from the team for a while, although that was a weak punishment, but it's something. But for Jordan Poole, that sends a message to him that they're okay with Draymond doing something like that. And if I'm him, that's going to stick with me, even if you try to push aside and say it's behind them. Deep down, it's going to fester, and I really do think it ultimately impacted Poole's confidence throughout the season. Bob Myers handled that situation very poorly, and if you're trying to build this team for the future and focusing on the development of your younger players, that is not the way to go. So between the questionable draft selections, the horrible contract given to Jordan Poole, also the fact that he prioritized Poole over their key role players that were key pieces in the 2022 title run, that was a mistake. But between that, not establishing a clear vision and a path forward beyond the current big three, and then also the fact that Myers really was a product of inheriting a perfect team and having a superstar player fall into his lap in Kevin Durant, doesn't really qualify him to be this superb GM, mastermind, and architect of the Warriors dynasty. I think we need to tell it like it is and say, yes, Myers was and is a good executive in the NBA, but he isn't this once-in-a-lifetime GM that is leaps and bounds better than all other GMs in the league. It's just not true. But I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments what you think about Bob Myers and him moving on from his role with the Golden State Warriors. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.